Today, I just want to dive in and show you the exact process that smart DeFi investors are using to actually make consistent cash flow off of their DeFi portfolio. Now, I'm going to give you guys a recommendation right now. And my recommendation is that you do not use that cash flow to live on. There's a lot of investors out there that want to take this cash flow, they want to use it as passive income, pay their bills with it. And while that's great, you can have a far greater effect if you compound that cash flow. And I'll be the first to say here that it is not passive income. That's why we've adjusted the way that we market everything towards DeFi income, because that's what it is. And you can make consistent DeFi income, but you do have to put in work. And while there is a passive element to it, you're still going to have to allocate 3 to 4 hours per week to your portfolio to manage things. And that's once it's up and running. That's after the learning curve. Anyways, we just wrapped up a huge rebrand at my company Builder Wealth, where we provide mentorship to DeFi investors that are struggling or investors that are just dabbling, that are looking to scale up confidently. But part of that rebrand is we wanted to be more authentic, more transparent, and of course, give more out for free. And while that might conflict with what we actually sell, we believe that we should be selling the implementation, and that information in this age, as well as information in this industry, should be publicly available. So today, I'm going to show you my exact process. So the first thing that we do is find cryptocurrencies. We're very big on finding the assets before we find the pools. And the reason why is because there is a psychological shift that comes with that. Whenever you're looking for assets first, and then you start to go look for pools with those assets, you're looking just amongst the assets that you like. Whereas if you just dive into looking for pools, you're going to find these high APR pools, and you're going to want to validate those pools for whatever reason. That's because they're doing a high APR. So if we were to start browsing pools right now, we're going to see these high APR pools, want to dive into them just because they are high APR. Even if we start looking at the assets, we're like, oh, this asset's relatively decent. Well, then we're still going to have the fact that this is a high APR pool in the back of our mind, and we're going to go into this pool with a biased opinion. It's the equivalent of if somebody at an investment bank was analyzing a company, yet the person that owned that company was their friend. They're going to want to have a reason to make that deal work, even if it's not a good deal. We analyze liquidity pools the exact same way. We don't want to have any bias whatsoever, and we do that by finding the assets first. Now, we typically like to find the assets on CoinGecko. You can do this by going over to specific categories over on CoinGecko. You just head to the cryptocurrency section, go to categories, and you will see a list of different categories. I primarily like to look at DePIN projects. DePIN stands for Decentralized Physical Infrastructure. But Made in USA is a pretty big narrative with the current US administration being pretty bullish on crypto. There's also DeFi-based cryptocurrencies if you're bullish on DeFi. These are other ones that I like to include in my portfolio as well. You have real-world assets. This is another solid industry that I like to invest into as well. But when it comes down to it, let's just say we were looking at decentralized finance projects. We would open up this category, and then from there, we can start to analyze these cryptocurrencies. So we're going to have our stuff like Lido Staked Ether, Hyperliquid, that type of thing. But then we'll have Chainlink, which powers DeFi, Uni, which is native to Uniswap. Now, Uni isn't that great of a token because it doesn't have revenue sharing. Whereas Aave, on the other hand, Aave is a pretty solid token because it has very good ecosystem integration. Ondo is a pretty solid token as well, and this is also in the real world asset sector, basically, and it has to do with the Ondo DeFi platform. Now, we can use artificial intelligence to actually review these cryptocurrencies. So one of the ways that we might do that is conduct a thorough analysis on Aave token and rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. We want to look for projects that have a high probability of appreciating. And then we can use ChatGPT deep research if we wish to. In this case scenario, I'm just going to use the search function to make this faster. Now, we have a bunch of prompts that we use at Builder Wealth for building your kind of own AI agent that analyzes these cryptocurrencies. And we also have an analysis infrastructure called VRM analysis. And what we're looking for is value, risk, and market. So where does it get its value from? Is it speculation or is it forced appreciation? How risky is it? In other words, is it listed on a lot of exchanges or few exchanges? Does it have a lot of liquidity or no? Right? On top of that, is it at key support levels or is it bullish right now? And then market. How does it perform compared to competitors and stuff along those lines? That's what we want to look at. But in this instance, it will conduct a little bit of analysis right here, and then it will rank things. It has a 9 out of 10 on fundamental strength, 8.5 out of 10 on adoption and TVL, 6.5 on technical momentum, 6 on regulatory risk, and then 7 on upside potential. And it gives us a couple examples over here. It says short term, weeks to months, it could see a 10 to 30% movement. Mid to long term, 1 to 3 years, $600 to $800 is feasible, and it's currently at $290, so that's also perfectly reasonable. And then of course, when you look at the high end of $1,000 by 2030, best case basically, it's going to be realistic here. And it will tell us a decent rating of 7.5 out of 10. But anyways, after we find different cryptocurrencies, we can head over to Metrics Finance and start to browse for liquidity pools, or we could use DeFi Llama or any other tool. I truly just think that Metrics Finance is the best tool out there and that we've created something amazing. What I like to do on Metrics Finance though is segment. So when I'm looking for a specific liquidity pool, I'm not just going to go and look at my Solana and EVM liquidity pools all at once. I'm going to look at my EVM first on, say, these networks and exchanges. And then later on, I'll go to Orca and Radium on Solana, Veldrum and Aerodrum for Optimism and Base, basically. I also segment Veldrum and Aerodrum because they use reward tokens. So it's a little bit different of a model as well. And I don't want to convolute things. So again, this is where I will start. So when it comes time to look for liquidity pools, we will go over here. We'll click on this little filter. And I believe that you do have to have Metrics Pro in order to be able to filter down these liquidity pools, but there is a free trial available. But we're simply going to type in Ethereum. And then what it says include over here, we're going to type in the list of cryptocurrencies that we want to potentially invest into. So I'll include Aave, I'll include Aether, GRT, Render. And as we start to type these, we're going to see pools that are ETH paired with at least one of these basically. So it's going to filter down those liquidity pools, and it's going to make it so we don't have thousands of results, but rather we only have the ones that we actually want to invest into, the high quality cryptocurrencies. So I've just typed in a few different cryptocurrencies right now to get started with. And then from there, I'm going to head over to the top pools section. So the top pools shows me 45 different liquidity pools right now. This is because we filtered it down. So instead of having thousands, we only have 45. And then from there, we can start to browse through them. Now I also want to filter these things down a little bit more. So I'm going to do TVL higher than $1 million. It's going to filter it down by a little bit. You'll see we now only have 9 pools right here. But the reason why I say $1 million is because typically I only want to deploy into pools that have a lot of other liquidity. I don't want to be the only one providing liquidity in this pool because that's significantly riskier than, of course, a bunch of other people providing liquidity as well. And then from there, there are 9 different pools. And a lot of these are actually for the Aave to Ethereum pool. So you see we have Aave to Ethereum showing 61% over here, showing 43% over here, and 35% over here. So I'd probably just want to not look at those because those aren't going to be relevant because this is doing a higher APR. And we can pull that thing up over on Metrics and start to simulate it. Now, unfortunately, I don't think there is another tool for simulating other than Metrics Finance, at least in the level of detail that we're going to go into today. But what I will say is a lot of the simulation tool on Metrics is free. So regarding the deposit amount, the first thing I'm going to do is set this to an accurate amount that I would actually deposit in this liquidity pool. And the reason why I do that is because I want to know right off the bat if that's going to affect the return. You could see going from $1,000, I'm getting 60.42% APR to $10,000, I'm getting 60.39% APR. Not too much dilution. If I go to say $100,000, it's getting hit a little bit more, roughly 0.3% or so. But even then, nothing too crazy. And even if I go from 100 grand to $1 million, it's only like 3% or so. So it's not diluting anything like crazy. That's why we set the deposit amount ahead of time. Now, me personally, I'm going to set this to $25,000 because that's around what I'm depositing into these pools right now. Now, the next thing that we need to do is actually start to find our range for this liquidity pool. So what I typically like to do is zoom out to 60 days on the calculation time frame. And then from there, I like to adjust my max price according to the high of this chart and my min price according to the low of this chart. Now, just because this chart is going down doesn't mean that the pool is doing bad. That means that the second asset is outperforming the first asset. In other words, the quote asset is outperforming the base asset. So Aave is going up more than Ethereum right now, or it's going down less than Ethereum right now, basically. It's one or the other essentially, but it's outperforming in some type of way because this is not a dollar price chart. This is a pool price chart, and it's found by taking the dollar prices of each asset. It's determining how much of one asset equals another at a specific period in time. Now, obviously we can't stop here. And the reason why is because our range, while might be doing an 81% APR, everything looks great. Our range is close to going out of range, basically. The price can easily go down and we're instantly out of range. We're far from the top price and close to the bottom price. So that tells us that this max price needs to be adjusted a little bit. Not a lot, just a little bit. So I'm probably going to set that max price to something like 10.8, maybe even 10.6 or so. And then from there, I'm going to set my min price to something along the lines of 7.8 or so. That's going to give me about a 53% allocation to Aave and a 48% allocation to Ethereum. Now that's good, but if Aave is the asset that's recently doing well and it's outperforming Ethereum over the past 60 days, wouldn't I want more exposure to Aave? Yeah, so we can get more exposure to Aave by adjusting that from 7.8 to something like 7.6. Now we're at 56% Aave. We want a little bit more, we can bring that min price down a little bit more. Now we're at 60% Aave. But again, we have to make sure that we are not going too directional to the point where we end up going out of range on the other end if there is a retracement. So I would say something like 7.5 is fairly reasonable. That starts us with 58% Aave, 42% Ethereum, and it gets us roughly a 70% APR as of the current calculation. But we need to refine this to make sure that we are looking at an accurate APR. So we do that in two ways. Number one, we want to look at this liquidity distribution chart. So currently there is $209,000 of liquidity on the current price, basically. Now, the peak price over here has $306,000 of liquidity. So what I like to do is I like to compare them. If we're super close to, let's just say the peak price, like let's just say we were right over here and it's a big jump from 237 to something like 298, then I would just assume the peak price is going to be the APR that we get, so 48%. But in this instance, we are a little bit far off. So I like to look at both, but at the same exact time, know that I am going to be getting higher as of now, and there is the potential to get lower later on in the future. So just keep that in mind. On top of that, we have to adjust the calculation time frame. So over here, you could see that this volume is somewhat consistent, but we have these days where we did 28 million and then 26 million or so just right in the middle. And that is affecting our results because when we look recently, we're doing anywhere from 5 to 10 million per day. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust my calculation time frame down from 60 all the way to roughly 20 days or so. And that's just going to factor the last 20 days of volume and fees into this calculation to ensure that we do have accurate data. And the reason why I chose 20 days is because the volume history is consistent the past 20 days. If anything, it has picked up, which would be better for us, which means we're going to exceed our expectations. So right now we dive into this pool, we're getting 71% right now. And then if the price goes over here or this liquidity moves, then we could get 50%, which either or on Ethereum to Aave, that's a pretty good return in my opinion. The reason why is because number one, we have a broader range. We are not going out of range today or tomorrow, right? We're going to be in range for probably 1, 2, maybe even 3 weeks. But of course, the other thing that we have to factor in is Aave is a relatively blue chip asset. Has solid fundamentals. ChatGPT rated it 7.5 out of 10, right? So there is competition in this pool. And the last thing that we do, and this is our bread and butter, this is something that I personally probably haven't shared on YouTube before, and I'm going to be sharing it today. We pull up both assets on CoinGecko, so Ethereum as well as Aave, and we compare and contrast them. So what we're looking for are jumps in the market, areas where there was a break in correlation. So you could see that over the past 3 months, obviously Ethereum saw a huge jump May 6th or so, and Aave just started going up. It went up, right? But it was more of a gradual incline, whereas Ethereum was pretty dead over here and then just completely skyrocketed. But again, that's not as valid compared to recently, and that's going to happen. What I want to look at is high periods of volatility. So it looks to me like this period right here, June 9th, where we went from 24.88 all the way up. June 11th, we're at basically 28.67. And then for Aave, it went from 254 all the way up to roughly 316. I want to look at that period. And essentially what I'm going to do is determine how much Ethereum went up. So 24.90 all the way up to 28.67. So if we do that, 24.90 to 28.67, that is a 15% increase for Ethereum. And then I'll go back over the metrics. I'll hit simulate position performance, take the current price of Ethereum, which is 26.54, and I'll see what a 15% increase puts it at, which would be a $3,052 price point. I will throw that over here in metrics finance, and then I will do the same exact thing for Aave. Aave went from 252 all the way up to 316. So we'll throw that in here, 252, 316. That was a 25% increase. So Aave is currently at $288. We will multiply that times 25% basically, or 125%, which puts it at $361, just like that. And now by doing that, we could see potential divergence loss. So we have $316, nearly $317 of divergence loss right here when we simulate it like that. And based on the current APR, which would assume a 50% APR, kind of the worst case scenario, it would take us about 9.5 days to outweigh that opportunity cost. So if we're in here for 9.5 days, you'll see we make enough fees, $321, to outweigh that. But if we're in here for only 5 days, we don't have enough fees to outweigh that. So in my opinion, this isn't too bad. Why? Because it took 2-3 days or so to get up to these prices and see that amount of divergence. And it takes us about 9 days to cover that. And this is on a more blue chip pair. And on top of that, it takes us those amount of days, assuming we're at that price point over there. We're at the current price point, it's going to take us far lower. It only takes us 6.5 days, which is far more reasonable. So now that we've gave that the check of approval on the upside, I want to look at this retracement over here, where it went from 28.67 all the way down to roughly 25.15. So 2867 to 2515. That would be minus 12.2%. So then I'll take the current price of Ethereum and do minus 12.2%. And we do that by taking the current price multiplied by the percentage, and that gives us 323. And then we just subtract that from the current price, which would be 2330. We paste that in Metrics Finance, and then we do the same exact thing for Aave. How much did Aave go down during that period? From 316 down to 266. We'll throw that in here, 316 down to 266. That's minus 15.8%. So then we'll grab the current price of Aave, which is 288, and we will multiply 15 point, let's just say 5%. And then we will take that number and we will subtract it from the current price, which would give us 243. We'll throw that in here. And you can see in that instance, let's just say we have no fees so far, only $48 of divergence loss. And we only need a day of fees to outweigh that. And if it's an instance where we have, let's just say, higher competition, so there's lower APR, it only takes us a day and a half. So that's also very, very reasonable for this liquidity pool. So I give this the check of approval on the downside as well and say that this pool is now validated. Now, the process that we just went through encompasses the blueprint and construct phase of our DeFi formula roadmap. And some of the frameworks that we used is number one, VRM framework for analyzing specific assets and just evaluating them. We also use the Fate framework for finding positions on Metrics Finance. We use the range framework for finding the range for this specific position. And we use the valid framework for actually validating the position. Now, the next step is to say, hey, this is a good pool. We want to deploy our capital into it, and we can actually create the position. This will take us directly over to Uniswap. It will open up as a V3 position because that's where the TVL is for this liquidity pool. It will select the assets in the fee tier for us. And all that's left for us to do is go in here, set our range. So we're just going to copy what we put in on Metrics Finance, 7.5 to 10.6. And it's going to auto correct it just a little bit because it has to find the closest tick. But then we could put in the amounts. We need roughly 3.96 Ethereum or so. It will pre-fill the amount of Aave that we need, which is going to be relatively close to Metrics Finance. But keep in mind the price is always changing, which is why there's always going to be a slight difference. But then you would be able to buy up that amount of asset using something like Llama Swap or Matcha or whatever and hit swap. And then from there, actually get invested into liquidity pool and start earning. And that right there would be the deploy phase of the DeFi formula roadmap. So guys, if you want me to go into the second half of this roadmap and walk you guys through the process of managing your pools and optimizing performance, let me know down below in the comment section. And I also want to hear from you guys, what problems are you currently facing in DeFi? Because I want to be able to make some content around the problems that you guys are facing. If you guys did enjoy, make sure to drop a like, subscribe when notifications turned on. And I am going to put a video on screen right now that will walk you through our entire DeFi formula process, and of course give you the opportunity to learn more about our mentorship if you guys are interested. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.